much for having me. You guys are either very curious people, very knowledgeable people, or very bizarre people to spend a rainy Friday night in here listening on some of this really heavy, deep stuff on suffering. And I want to just see if I can pull together maybe everything that we've heard today. My entire life, my entire job is to talk to people who think the whole Christianity thing is crazy. Think that there really isn't any evidence for Christianity. Who say, you know what, I don't think I can believe this because God has hurt me, or he's disappointed me, or Christians are just really mean, nasty people. And oftentimes this question of suffering comes up. It's a popular one, and it's simply because it hurts. And so sometimes when we think about this question, we are looking for somebody to give us clarity and give us very good answers. And I've said several times in speaking with people, you know, I'm an apologist. What I do is give reasons why Christianity is true. But you really want to know how God or how people survive and can still believe in God, and can still worship a God even in the midst of suffering? I'm not the one to ask. Jimmy is. Lisa is. Victor is. Those are the people who've had to say, let me tell you how I felt. Let me tell you how I grieved. Let me tell you what I experienced. And so what I want to try and do with you tonight in the time that we have left is share a little bit with you on this question of why, but also this question of where. And I know it's natural for us to say, God, why? Why would you allow this? Why would you allow this pain? Why would you allow this suffering? Why would you allow for somebody to go through something so horrific? And I think when we think about this topic, when we think about the agony that suffering brings, I think we think about our lives. We think about the people around us. And we ask why as if there's one simple answer, as if there's one thing that somebody's going to say that's going to make it all go away. But the reality is that this is a tough question. It's not quite so simple. It's not, what color shirt are you wearing? Here's your answer, and then we all feel better and we go home. This is complex. And there's so much more to it than just a simple answer of why. There's multiple answers, multiple ways in which we can approach this, multiple ways in which we can think about this, multiple ways in which we can grieve over this. I remember one time I was speaking on suffering, and I was speaking to a group of people in Boston. And the whole topic, actually I wasn't speaking on suffering, I was actually speaking on, I think, the credibility of the Bible. And we opened up for Q&A, and this one young lady raised her hand. It was in a room where we had served lunch, so the tables were circular, so not everybody could see each other because not everybody was facing each other, but she was facing me. And she raised her hand and she says, Alycia, why would God allow all this pain and this suffering? And as she's asking this question, the tears are coming. And as I'm answering this question, she's just wiping her face and wiping her eyes, and the grief is all over her. It hurts. And we've heard from some people here today of how it's hurt them. And as I look around this room, although maybe most of you have not been up here to speak, many of you have your own story. For many of you, this isn't just something that philosophers go through. For many of you, this is your story. This is your life. And so when Christianity approaches this question, it keeps these things in mind. It's not a simple why answer. There's more to it, and it's painful. But in order for us to really even begin to think through this, as George did earlier, considering other viewpoints helps us. Because it depends on who's up here, it's going to depend on what question or what answer you're going to get. If I was a Muslim, And he said, Alycia, where's God in this? Where's God in this suffering? Why would he allow this? The answer would be, first of all, I would grieve at the pain, but I would never protest. I would never question God. Because it's up to his will, it's his plan, it's what he desires, and therefore I have to accept it. In fact, I think it was just last year, earlier this year, I was in Montreal and we were going to do a dialogue with the Islamic Society there. And we wanted to do one on suffering. And we had a hard time knowing what to title the talk or title the dialogue because we wanted to say, why does God allow suffering? But the Muslim group was like, we would never ask that question. It's his will. And we wouldn't call it suffering because it's part of his plan. So we had to do a lot of finagling to get the talk to something what worked for them that made sense within Islam. And so we basically said, where is God in hardship? But if I was a Hindu, and you said, explain to me this whole topic. Well, I would say, a good conduct in your previous life leads to good conduct or good life here. But since you're going through suffering, you probably didn't do very good in your previous life. And so you're reaping basically what you've sown. The Buddhists would tell us if we live our life without desires or fear, then we can disarm suffering and have inner peace. And of course, the atheist says, why are you asking this question? Why shouldn't there be suffering? Why do you think that suffering is something that shouldn't be? But the Christian answer is different. The Christian answer helps us to think through why, but also where. This idea that it surely is possible that God could have created a world without pain and suffering, but it would be a world in which we would never know love. It would be a world in which we would lose our free ability to choose things that are good, including love. You would love in that world because you had to, because there was no other choice, because you couldn't choose not to. And so we live in a world in which a lot of hurtful, painful, nasty, disgusting things happen. But have we ever thought that maybe asking the question why may actually not get us to where we want to be? I remember speaking in a school in England, and a young girl who was trying to sort out this whole Christianity thing came up to me at the end of one of the events and said, Alycia, my father was an alcoholic, and we tried every way to help him. We tried to get him help here, we tried to do this for him, and eventually, he drank himself to death. Why did God allow it? Now, I'm sure all of you are very envious of my job at that point, right? So what do I say to this young girl? Why did God allow that to happen to my father? Well, here's the thing. Unless I get some massive download in that moment, I can't speak specifically to why her particular father didn't get better. But let's say I did. Let's just say hypothetically, I got this incredible understanding or knowledge of her situation, and I say, I know why. And I tell her, I said, you know why your father drank himself to death? Because he didn't want kids. And so when you and your brother were born, he didn't know what to do with you guys, and he didn't know how to deal and process through being a parent, so he drank himself. You got your why. Aren't you happy? You've been waiting for this moment, and I gave you your why. But in that moment, would she be rejoicing? Would the why have brought healing, or would the why have brought hurt? And sometimes when we focus so much on this why, we make the assumption that if I just knew why, if I could just understand, then my situation will get better. And that's not true. What if the why made your situation worse? What if the understanding actually brought more pain? And that's why I like the idea of this question, and even the 3 people that spoke before me, the 4 people that spoke before me. Because I think the better way for us to handle this is to see if we can find out where is God in the midst of all of this pain. One other thought. I would never want you to think that I'm going to come up here and give you some fantastic answer about suffering that's going to make you walk out of here and say, you know what, I'm okay with this. I can handle suffering, so the next time I see a starving child, it's not going to affect me at all because I get it now. And the next time I see somebody hurting or having an abuse situation, I'm not going to be bothered because I totally understand it now. There's no answer that somebody's going to give you that's going to make the pain go away. And if there was an answer that led you to somehow feel like the pain was gone, it wasn't a good answer and it was an evil one. Because this is supposed to hurt. We will never hear anything that's going to make us not mourn. We never should hear anything that's going to make us not cry. And so one thing we have to begin to understand is that suffering is something that we need to learn how to live in. Because we should never get ourselves to a place where it doesn't bother us. Imagine if we became a society that didn't grieve at suffering. How dangerous of a place would we be? So perhaps this is one of the reasons why we find ourselves unsettled in understanding suffering when we're told why, because it doesn't seem to get us anywhere. And maybe what we really ultimately want is some sort of divine being who is involved in the affairs of our life, especially the very worst moments. And I think it's here that Christianity can be helpful. Because Christianity communicates three things to people in times of suffering. Number one, it communicates as if God was saying to us, you need to, in the midst of your suffering, remember who I am. Number two, in the midst of your suffering, you need to remember that I am here. And number three, in the midst of suffering, you need to remember that I am hope. And while those three things may seem trivial or unhelpful, it actually makes a big difference, as we will see in a few minutes. Christianity doesn't teach us how to remove the pain, rather how to live in it. Perhaps the story of Job can help us with this first thought. Remember who I am. Many of you are familiar with the story of Job. This poor man had a really tough lot at life. First, everything was going great, actually. Very wealthy, a lot of livestock, children. And in a very quick amount of time, it was all gone, all taken from him, including his own body being full of sores. And the book of Job in the Bible is 42 chapters long. And basically from chapter 2 to the end of chapter 37 is Job and his friends asking why, trying to figure out why. What happened? How did everything go from so great to so disastrous like this? Well, maybe you did something wrong, some of his friends said, or you failed here, or God's punishing you this way. And people are offering up all of these answers of why and why and why. And during this time, God is absolutely silent. Doesn't say a word. Doesn't acknowledge it. Doesn't say anything to Job. But then, in Job chapter 38, Job gets the audience with God that so many of us crave. I'm asking you a question, God. Why aren't you answering me? And so God says, fine. And in chapter 38 to chapter 41, we have an extremely long section of God responding to Job. Now imagine, Job gets the audience with God that so many people want. And you want to hear what God says? He says this in response to Job's suffering. Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Prepare yourself like a man, for I will question you and you shall answer me. Where were you, Job, when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if you have understanding. Who has determined its measurements, if you know? Or who has stretched the line upon it? To what are its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone? Or who shut up the sea with doors when it broke forth and went out of the womb? When I made the cloud its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and broke up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors and said, "This far you will come, but no further. And here your proud waves must stop." Can you tie the cords to the Pleiades or loosen the belts of Orion? Do you know the time when the wild mountain goats produce offspring? Or can you observe when the deer gives birth? Can you number the months that they fulfill? Or do you know the time when they bring forth? Will the wild ox be willing to serve you or spend the night by your manger? And that was just a few select passages out of those 3 or 4 chapters there. So this is interesting. You might be slightly confused, right? Because Job was saying, "God, where are you? Why is this happening to me?" And then God begins to say some interesting things to Job. Pretty cool. His role in creation, his power over the stars and the constellation, and the fact that the animals are even aware that he's God. But he didn't answer Job's suffering question. Why do you think this is? Do you think maybe God just misunderstood Job's question? Maybe Job stumped him. Maybe God was starting to answer and he forgot the question part of the way through. What is this? What kind of answer was that to my question? But I actually don't think God forgot the question. I think God knew exactly what Job needed to hear in the midst of his suffering. And he reminded Job of the bigger picture. In the midst of all this pain, Job, you can only see your situation. But let me expand your vision. Let me expand your eyes. Let me expand the way in which you are experiencing and seeing yourself and the bigger picture here. Let me remind you who I am. I am still the God who creates. I am still the God that creation knows. I am still the God that the animals recognize. And while you think you need to know why to get through this painful situation, you actually don't. You just need to remember who I am. Essentially, be still, Job, and know that I am God. That's it. No why, no explanation, no addressing of the situation. But what's interesting is several times throughout this, Job starts to speak a little bit, and it's not really working out for Job because he's kind of realizing, man, I'm way in over my head here, And when God finishes, Job says something very interesting. He said, before, my ears heard of you, but now, after listening to you talk about yourself in creation and your power and your abilities, now my eyes see you. I can see who you are again. It didn't change anything. It didn't mean that his kids, which were taken from him, were suddenly came back to life. It didn't mean that his livestock that was taken from him suddenly came back to life. No, his situation hadn't changed, but his outlook, the way he viewed things, had. In other words, there's a way that even in the midst of our pain, we can have a shift of perspective. And that actually matters. It may sound trivial to have a change in perspective, but actually, you kind of do some of this. Actually, especially if you're parents, you've done this to your children. But something as simple as a vaccine. You go to the doctor's office and you know it's going to hurt. But you know and you put yourself through it because of the bigger picture. Because the bigger picture is, I'm going to get meningitis if I don't get the meningitis vaccine. And that's much worse. So I'm going to go through this pain, even though I know it's going to hurt, even though it's make my kids angry with me. I'm going to go through it because I know the bigger picture. In other words, when we have a perspective change, it means that we see and we live through these experiences differently than if we were focusing just on the fact that we were sick. And I think that's what God was saying to Job is, look, I'm not telling you why. In fact, there's a really good chance we all know more about the story of Job than what Job knew of his own story. We have a special insight into Job's life that he didn't have. So clearly, though, he didn't need to know why. He just needed to remember who God was, and that was exactly what he needed. And that's important because if someone is able to allow God to be present in their experience, it means that in suffering, he is actually here. Many of you have kids in here, or maybe you remember when you were a kid. But let's say this was your, day 3 on your two-wheeler bike. Okay, so you're like 6 years old, 5, 6 years old. And you are just riding up and down the street and you're having a blast. And of course, inevitably, because that's the way Murphy's Law works, you hit a rock and you fall down. Your knee is scraped up. What's the very first thing you do? Mom, Mom, Mom. You're screaming for Mom, right? Mom's coming. She runs out. She picks you up. Okay? In this moment, do you want Mom to explain to you the forces of gravity and how the blood is starting to coagulate and clot up and why you were driving too fast and that's what caused you to happen? Is that what you really want? Do you want this big explanation of your circumstance? Or do you just want her to hold you? In that moment of grief and pain, do we really need the why? Or do we really just want to be held? What is actually more healing for us? What is actually more comforting for us? And that's why when people have particular ailments in life or sickness or when somebody's going through something, what do friends do? They go and they sit with them. They talk with them. They let them know, I'm here. You're not alone. I will walk through this pain with you. I will walk through this situation with you. But you won't be by yourself. Why? Because even in my presence, even though I can't take your cancer away, I can make sure that you don't suffer alone and I can bring you comfort within your pain. Now just imagine if the person comforting you wasn't just your friend or your neighbor or a family member, but it was actually God. What would the level of comfort be if God was saying, I'll hold you in your comfort or in your discomfort. I'll hold you in your pain. Many of you may have heard of a woman named Corrie ten Boom. She was born in 1892 in Amsterdam. She was a Dutch Christian and author of over 55 books. And you thought you were doing something with your life, okay? 55 books. Who became known for her role in hiding Jews during World War II. It is estimated that through her family and friends, they were able to save the lives of about 800 Jews until they were discovered and they were arrested on February 28, 1944. She was then sent to prison. The beginning part of her prison stay included 7 weeks in solitary confinement before she was allowed to step outside for the very first time. Now, think about this. A woman who has had people hidden in every corner and crevice of her house to go from having people all around to being alone for 7 weeks before she could even step outside. Imagine the mental anguish and torment that somebody like this is beginning to go through. Even in modern day times, we recognize we need to put a time limit on solitary confinement, even in the prison system, because we recognize it's not healthy for the inmates. It's a different time then. Nazis didn't care. And so she talks about the physical and mental and emotional pain that she went through, as well as the desolation of loneliness. And so during those times, she writes these words, biscuits, a croquette, caramels. But why did I take no delight in these things? There was really no pleasure in nibbling at this or that dainty by myself. It occurred to me to offer some to the Wachtmeisterin, but I let the impulse pass. I knew I should never in the future, was there to be a future? Eat dainties by myself. If ever I had anything good to eat, I should remember cell 384 and invite others to enjoy it with me. It was dark in my cell. I talked with my God. Never before had fellowship with him been so close. It was a joy I hoped would continue unchanged. I was a prisoner, and yet, how free. Upon remembering stories in the Bible where God was with people in pain, she went on to write these words. I was no longer alone. God was with me. With him I could go on, and once more I saw the blue sky, the flowers and shrubs, and I saw the garden as a part of a beautiful free world in which I too should someday be able to walk about. The earth is in much the same way a solitary prison garden, and heaven is the great free out of doors, where fulfillment of joy awaits us, the children of God. If you notice, her comfort didn't come in why God was allowing her to go through this. Rather, she found comfort in him, that he was there, that even in her solitary confinement, she felt like he was close. He was there with her. For whatever reason, friends, the Christian God has decided to deal with suffering not by waving a magic wand to make it go away, but by being involved in it. And perhaps because in the face of suffering, words and explanations just aren't enough. We need something more than just answers. But how could that be possible? How is it possible that God, who's so distant, ever actually understand or feel what humanity feels? Well, what's interesting is that in the Christian Bible, it talks about how Jesus is the image of the invisible God. In other words, Christians believe that if you want to know what God is like, you can look at Jesus and know. If you want to know if God mourns or grieves, well, you can look at Jesus, because he cried when his friend died, and he begged in the garden to not have to, before he was crucified, to beg to not have to go through this. Like, he felt agony and pain. He knows what it's like to be alone, have his friends abandon him. He knows what it's like to suffer. And so in Christianity, it talks about a God who actually knows what you're going through. He felt pain. Jesus felt pain, and he felt suffering, even to the point of crucifixion. If we've never sought thee, we seek thee now. Thine eyes burn through the dark, our only stars. We must have sight of thorn pricks on thy brow. We must have thee, O Jesus of the scars. The heavens frighten us, they are too calm. In all the universe we have no place. Our wounds are hurting us. Where is the balm? Lord Jesus, by thy scars we claim thy grace. If when the doors are shut thou drawest near, only reveal those hands, that side of thine. We know today what wounds are. Have no fear. Show us thy scars. We know the countersign. The other gods were strong, but thou wast weak. They rode, but thou didst stumble to a throne. But to our wounds, only God's wounds can speak. And not a God has wounds, but thou alone. I think it was Dostoevsky who said, I may not know the reason for suffering, but I know that no other God has scars. And in Christianity, it talks of and it teaches of a God who doesn't just look down and say, yep, that's my will. Hope you make your way through it. It doesn't say, oh, yep, you lived a pretty bad previous life, so this is what you deserve. It's a God who says, I will not remove myself from the tears of people when they call on me. I too have experienced pain. And I too can be there to help you as you are going through yours. And understanding why or knowledge only is a passive intellectual response. But as Philip Yancey says, no intellectual answer will solve suffering. Perhaps this is why God sent Jesus as one response to human pain, to experience it and absorb it into himself. Jesus coming to earth did not solve human suffering, but at least it was an active, personal response. In the truest sense, no words can speak more loudly than the Word who was from the beginning. So God doesn't exempt himself from suffering, but his love for his people draws him out of his comfortable, safe place into this world filled with pain and brokenness, hurt feelings and hurt emotions and experience. A God who suffers so that he himself can come for us when we are suffering. Where's God? He's right here. Just like that 5 or 6-year-old, when their mom comes running and picks up that child who's crying and buries their head into her clothes, and now the child's tears are all over mom, and the blood is dripping on her clothes. And she wipes the tears from her child's face, gets herself filthy, gets herself dirty, because she loves her child and because she herself knows what it's like to fall off of that bike and be in pain, because she has 2 scarred knees. And what the God in Christianity offers is himself. Offers his hand to be able to say, you will never suffer or agonize alone. So remember who God is, remember that he is there, but finally remember that he is our hope. And without hope, it's even harder to walk through this life. You know, hopelessness is something that is coming up more and more now in our society. Or people are feeling like things are just so bad. There's a small clip from a movie where it talks about this man who goes to a doctor. And he goes to the doctor and he says, Doctor, I am not doing well. Life is rough. Things are really hard. I'm really down. I'm just really sad. Can you help me? And the doctor says, relax, friend. The great clown Pagliacci is in town. You need to go see Pagliacci. He'll make you laugh. He'll make everything get better. And the man says, but doctor, I am that clown. Where do we go, friends? When the very things that are supposed to bring us smile and joy and happiness no longer draw that response out of us? What happens when we grow weary of the pleasures of this life? What happens when we just don't feel like there's anything exciting to keep living for? You talk to a psychologist and they'll tell you the surest sign that somebody is in a very dangerous position is when they feel hopeless and when they feel helpless. And those positions when you really need to pay attention. Suffering can make us feel helpless. But if Christianity is true, it will never make us feel hopeless. Because Christianity points towards a future that is more than this life, a world in which there won't be any pain and suffering, a world in which people won't cry and be in agony anymore, but most importantly, it'll be a world in which people get to experience the best thing possible, and that's a relationship with their Creator. And while for some people that may not seem like that's all that big of a deal, it actually makes a huge deal. To have a hope and a guarantee that something great is about to come will change the way that you live and experience everything here. And Christianity talks about hope as a guarantee. I'm sure most people in here have their driver's license. And we know full well that when we get in our cars, there's a good chance that we can get in an accident. So what do? We put on our seatbelts. So that hopefully it'll help in some way. But what if we knew? What if we had a guarantee that if I got in that car, I was going to get in a car accident and die? Would I get in that car and put on my seatbelt? Or would I avoid getting in that car at all? In other words, when there's the possibility that something might happen, that I might get in an accident, you make minor changes. You just put on a seatbelt. That's a minor change. But when you have a guarantee that something will absolutely happen, you don't get in the car at all, and that's a big change. In other words, a guarantee of something can overhaul the way in which you live your life. And so when you have a belief system or when you follow something that gives you a hope as a guarantee, that changes everything for you right now. Doesn't mean it eliminates the pain. Doesn't mean it makes these things go away. It doesn't mean that the Christian life is full of happiness and joy and we're just skipping along and holding hands. But it does mean that in the midst of pain, there's always hope. And really, what else is left for somebody to hold on to when they feel so at the end of their strength, but a promise that they will one day smile again? My grandmother was this 5'0", cute little Jamaican lady. If you've never encountered a Jamaican grandmother, you need to find somebody who has one and take theirs, okay? Because they are like the best things ever. She was so cute. She lived in Jamaica, I think, until her 40s, where she actually came to America. And you might be able to tell that I'm American by the fact that I don't say A every 3 minutes. But my grandmother came to America in like her 40s or so, and she, in Jamaica, only went up to about 5th or 6th grade. And she wasn't very smart, she would say to me. She goes, Alycia, I'm not very smart. I used to help her with her mail when I was like 10, help her sort through a lot of these things. And she would say, I'm not very smart, but God teaches me. like, okay, Grandma. And as a kid, I remember staying at her house and waking up early in the morning and peering into her room. And she'd always be on her knees, praying to God and reading her Bible. And I remember just being a little kid being like, wow, she like really knows God. Like, God, like, I don't really know you like that, but that's probably because I'm 7. But maybe when I get older, like, then I'll be like that. And as we got older, her and I just got closer and closer. And towards the end of her life, we started noticing that she was leaving the stove on, or she didn't remember if she ate lunch or not. And we started thinking something might not be right here. So we brought her to the doctor, and he put her through a bunch of different tests, and he said, well, here's the thing. Chances are she's in the early stages of Alzheimer's. And that was devastating for me. And I knew that, well, I guessed that maybe she didn't really understand. But she said, no, Alycia, I understand fully everything he's saying. I understand this, doctor. I understand. I was like, okay, Grandma. So we went out into the lobby, and my aunt was paying the bills. And my grandmother comes over to me, and she goes, Alycia, how are your brother and sister? I said, oh, Grandma, they're okay. They're fine. And kind of walked off and was thinking for a little bit. And like 8 seconds later, she goes, so Alycia, how are your brother and sister? And the tears just came to me. And I think maybe she snapped out of it. I don't know. But she just I remember her just hugging me and saying, Alycia, don't you worry about me. I'm going to be just fine. Whenever God is ready for me, I'm ready. Don't you worry about me. I'm not worried about me. As time went on, we ended up having to put her in a nursing home because she really wasn't able to do really much by herself. And I remember the very last time I went to go visit her. My sister and I went to go see her, and she was sharing a room with somebody else who also had Alzheimer's. And as we're sitting there just reading the Bible to my grandmother, this other person over here is just crying out and saying, nobody loves me, and I'm all alone, and nobody cares about me. And she's just going on and on. So I tell the nurse aides, I'm like, look, she's really having a hard time. And they come in, they say, that's not true. Now, your daughter comes in every weekend. She comes to see you. No, nobody loves me. Yes, we love you. You're cared for. So I'm trying to read and talk to my grandmother, who hasn't spoken to me at this point in probably 2.5 years. Like, she doesn't speak anymore. I'm reading the Bible to her, and we kind of lower her back down into her bed, and she starts mumbling. So I put my ear really close to just listen to her. And it's clear as day, and I can't explain it, but it's clear as day, this woman who has not uttered words to me in several years she's like, mumble, 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 goes, thank the Lord, and then goes back to mumbling. And I looked at her and I said, yes, Grandma, thank the Lord. 2.5 months later, she passed away. I got the phone call from my mother that I dreaded most of my life. But a woman who even in her most incoherent state had grounded within herself years ago a hope that would transcend and go beyond anything this life and the circumstances in this life could give her. And so even in her state of just not knowing anything and not being able to take care of herself, all her body could utter were the words that she had uttered all of her life. Thank the Lord. The last words I heard this woman say. Hope gave joy, even in death. Even in her sickness, her Alzheimer's didn't go away. People still die, we still hurt, and we still have pain and agony. But we potentially have, within Christianity, the idea and the ability to know how to live in it. And the crucifixion, the cross in Christianity is a central doctrine because it tells us that on the cross, God provides a way for people to be in relationship with Him. That the stuff that we've done wrong that have made us experience distance from God and make us feel separation from God is not really how we were supposed to live, nor is it how we have to live. And when we choose Him, when we accept Him, when we say, yes, you know what? Actually, I can't do this on my own. Actually, I am in need of somebody greater than me to help me from me. Then we can experience a relationship with a God who says, I will be your comfort. I will be your hope. I will be your support in the time of need. The elimination of suffering will happen. Not now, though, but in the future. In the very final book of the Bible, the author John writes this. He says, Then I saw a new earth, for the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea. I, John, saw the holy city coming down out of heaven from God, and I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Look, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away all tears from their eyes. There will be no more death, nor will there be any more sorrow, nor crying, nor pain, for the former things have passed away. And that, my friends, is the hope that Christianity offers us in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our confusion, in the midst of our agony, in the midst of our uncertainty, is that one day this will all end. I love the idea of God wiping tears from our face. It's a very personal kind of response. It's over and it's done. And if maybe we can take in some of these principles, maybe if Christianity truly is true, which, spoiler alert, I think it is, then maybe we have something that gives us practical tools and practical way to process through this life that is full of anguish and grief and misery. Thank you guys so much for your time.